Okay, so it was 1989 when you got sober.
February, yeah.
What did that look like?
I was no longer going to sleep and waking up. I was passing out and coming to. And, life was just like, a film noir.
I apologize. 1989. What year was the Cafe Gratitude?
That was way later. That was 04.
That was.
Oh, okay. So you were sober then, but you were still just not together.
Yeah.
Well, you were on some prescription
So
medication.
the what happened was I was during the filming I was sober for 17 years.
Oh wow.
Yeah, it's kind of a giveaway, but it was but after the film was a whole other thing that happened. But in 1989, that was my first exposure to the recovery process. And I had no idea about it. I've seen some movies of, whatever there were, but there really wasn't a sophistication about recovery like there is now. I was, as I said, I was no longer going to sleep and waking up. I was passing out and coming to, and I was getting to the point where I somehow was able to drive, and I'd get to my apartment and I would pass out on the floor. I couldn't even make it to the bedroom. And two nights in a row, I passed out on the living room floor, and 2 mornings in a row, I'd wake up drenched, and it wasn't from perspiration. I was starting to lose control of my body, and I freaked out. And I remembered I had a friend who has since passed away, my friend Norman, who was one of those guys, and I'm sure we all have one, that no matter how, we would, like, one night we went on a tear. Really, it was like 2 days. And I got back, we got back to his loft, and I could barely make it to the couch. I passed, just like, I couldn't smoke one more cigarette. I couldn't take one more drink. I couldn't do one more line. And I'm like, just nearly dead on the couch. And this guy, he disappears, and he comes back to the room with a mirror, with a shot, 3 lines, and some cigarettes. And I couldn't do it. That guy got sober. And I remember, because he was in New York, I was in D.C., and I thought, well, Norman's not drinking. Well, maybe if Norman's not drinking, maybe there's something I can do. And I got in touch with AA at the desk, and I spoke to this guy, and I'm rambling, whatever I'm rambling. And the guy says, son, it sounds like you're ready to surrender to sobriety. And I thought, holy shit, this is not good. But
my skin was crawling just as you said that, because I feel that feeling, of like, oh God.
Right. This is the end of any joy or pleasure in my life. And in Washington in those days, it was a small southern town, so there's a lot of southern stuff going on.
DC?
In DC. And so I remember it was February, it was cold, and I remember going into, towards the meeting, and it was already dark. And all I knew about AA was that you have to say your name and that you're an alcoholic. And so I would be in front of a store window and practice, and I went in, and I didn't say anything during the meeting because I didn't know if you were allowed to say anything without being a member. I didn't know anything. And then at the end, the guy says, well, does anybody have any burning desires? And I thought, well, that sounded safe. And I raised my hand and I said, my name is Frank. I'm an alcoholic. I need help and I don't know what to do. That's exactly the first words I ever uttered in the meeting. And next thing I know, the thing ends. They do the serenity prayer, and these guys just surrounded me. And, and I remember this one guy that he was about 4 inches shorter than me, and he was wearing a denim jacket.
That's pretty short.
He was I know. Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. And so he had a roadmap for his, on his face. It's like really a lot of lines, but his eyes were really clear, and he looked like he was actually paying attention to what I was saying. That alone, really hit me. And so. And he gave me a job, and I thought, this guy, I was like a mess.
You were unemployed at the time?
I was a carpenter at the time, and I wasn't employed, and and I was so toxic, and we were building a deck, and I was the guy with the chop saw, and he'd call out a measurement. I mean, I was so toxic that when my sweat hit the wood, it caught fire. I mean, I was just such a disaster, and I thought that this guy must have hired me because he had some kind of karmic debt, because I was absolutely worthless. But I was, people would just show up and help me just be in this state that I was in. And little by little, I just accumulated some time, and then I realized, what happened is that I was sober a little while, and I consider this to be like the real significant flashpoint to the next part of my journey, is that I was like sort of like mystified by this thing. I was waking up and sober every day. This was mystifying me.
You were living alone at the time?
In DC.
Were you just like constantly on the phone with your sponsor? Like, how the fuck did you make it home without hitting up a liquor store?
Well, I didn't have, I was done. I wasn't in that frame. And there is a funny story. One Sunday night, which Sundays were always dreary. Sunday nights were always dreary. And I come out of a meeting, and it was an 8:30 meeting. So it was 9:30, and everything was closed, and it was February, so there's like dirty ice on the ground, and it's just, everything just looks so dreary. It was the dreariness of what was around me was a direct reflection of my internal landscape.
This is still in New York City?
In DC.
Oh, this is in DC.
So I'm walking around, and I see this place called the Yes Bookstore that was open. So I go in. There's nobody there. There's a Sikh guy at the cash register with a turban and the bindi, and I'm looking around at these books, Care of the Soul and Seed of the Soul, and Course in Miracles, and I look up at the guy, and I said, man, I really could have used this information when I was in my 20s, but there's no way I would have got through it. It would have bored me to death. And the guy looks at me, he goes, "That is how the information protects itself from you." And I thought, oh, fuck. What's that? Anyway, so I didn't have that, the cravings subsided. I was very lucky that way. I just knew that I was done. I was just done. And I didn't even know what that meant, really. I just knew that the way I was living I couldn't do it anymore. I just couldn't do it anymore. Little by little, a day at a time, next thing I know, I'm clean a year. And it was just, I just could not believe it.
Yeah, I can't even wait to get to a year. I haven't been sober for more than 9 months, even once in my life. So, yeah. So you were just so steeped in pain, you were ready for some pleasure.
Yeah, it's exactly.
You're just, this pain is literally killing me, and you just want to feel good. And you had the kids at the time,
right?
And
right.
so you were probably feeling deep down like, I got to work. I got to make some money. I've got to.
Well, it wasn't just the working. It was just like. What I realized, and what I was going to say was that, the pivotal part of my recovery was, okay, is this great thing that I'm waking up clean and I'm waking up without a hangover for X amount of time. And then as like whatever those mechanisms that I was using to play my part and to navigate the world, some of them started to dissolve. And all of a sudden what emerged was a recognition, a Panavision Technicolor recognition of how my behavior was affecting everybody around me. And up until then, I didn't give that much thought. But it was almost like an assault, that recognition. And what I realized is that in addiction, 100% of the problems are relational. And of course, I'm the common denominator. And it starts with me. And when I start looking at my part, I remember doing some work with a sponsor one time, and I was doing a fourth step, and I had all these resentments, and about the Catholics and the abuse and all that stuff and the violence. And then when I read it all off, the guy looks at me and says, "Well, what about your part? What was your part?" And I got really angry. My part, I was a kid, pop, 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 It was like, what do you mean my part? I'm a victim. He said, your part is that you never even tried to get out of that. You just stayed in there. That was your part. That you never even tried to resolve this within yourself. And
it's a bit much to ask of someone.
Yeah, but it's a bit much to ask someone to tolerate an addict.
Yeah,
it's a bit much. We're not easy to deal with.
Yeah,
we impose a great deal of sorrow and grief on people.
Was that your sponsor at the time who was doing that work with you?
Yeah.
The fourth step, because the next step is like making amends.
Well, no, the next step actually is not yet. It's coming, but there's 4 and 5 where you do your inventory and then you share that with a sponsor, or it doesn't have to be a sponsor. It could be. I knew one guy that was so paranoid. This is talk about self-centered. He flew from Italy to Seattle. I said, why didn't you stop in New York? He says, well, maybe some people knew me. I thought, man, yeah. And it's just funny. We think a lot more of ourselves than we deserve. But
yeah, because like what my brother was just saying, for somebody to kind of like call you out like that, because that step, the fourth step, is you're just like trying to get it out, and then,
right?
And then for somebody to be like, cool, well,
that's part of the step is looking at your part.
Yeah,
and again, I was very fortunate that this was a loving person. So I felt, so he said that, but because I knew he loved me, like I was able to stay in that space and work through that. And that's very, very important. But the next one after 5 is 6 and 7, which is basically, you shore up this, you start to shore yourself up in a sense, right? Where you recognize, you start looking at stuff and again, looking at your part, not your fault. Because if you look at your fault, you're trapped in that place where, you have this one part of you has this insight, and the other part of you is beating your back with a cat of nine tails, right?
Yeah, there's a difference there for sure. One is like a shame or a guilt.
Right.
The other one is just taking ownership of.
Right.
What it reminds me of? Did you ever read the book by Alexander
Solzhenitsyn?
That Cancer Ward.
Right.
Where
I did actually.
Part of how he got through that, if you remember, in it is he said he just looked at all the things that were, quote, like wrong in his life or the world even, and he asked himself, like, what did he do to contribute to all this negative stuff? And so by taking that ownership, it gave him a sense of empowerment to get through the.
Well, he also wrote the Gulag Archipelago, which is the other one that he did. But
that one I read a quarter of. I did not finish the Gulag Archipelago. That's a really deep book that I can only try to attempt to read in the wintertime because it's just so.
Well, Russian novelists are not known for their lightheartedness.
When it's summertime, I want to try and enjoy life.
If you're not sure about if you're on the fence about suicide, pick up a Russian novel.
Especially if it was written during the time of like Lenin and Stalin.
Right. Or even now, it's not so great, but.